Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, nice to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Today we'd like to visit a bit with a subject that's in the news very much. It's an aggravating thought for anybody who's ever been on an airplane or contemplates getting on an airplane, and that has to do with the TSA in the long lines. Everybody knew they were inefficient, but somebody had the temerity to actually take a picture of a line. It was described miles long. I guess when you do all this zigzagging, it's very, very long. And the exasperation, the record for the TSA actually protecting us and saving us from any terrorist attack, so far I think they're not doing so well. They haven't come up with any great successes, and we'll talk a little bit about their failures and what we need to do about it. But this problem has been here with us since it was created, quickly after 9/11. Just like the Patriot Act, it was passed quickly, and the law was available with a little tinkering, and we passed the Patriot Act under these very difficult conditions. So once again, I remember the debate very clearly on the House floor. We have to have the TSA. If you don't care about safety. You don't care about the people. You don't care about we've been attacked. And of course, we fought it, but we weren't very successful because the whole argument was if we need a little bit more security in our airlines, and obviously we do, should we continue to depend on the federal government? They were already in charge. FAA was in charge of the security that we did have because the airlines didn't want it. They didn't want to have the liability. So the big argument was, well, what we need to do, of course, from the left and the right, I mean, we had a president, a Republican president, and that is this massively increase, not the FAA, but a new Department of Transportation, to TSA. And of course, that's the way it went. And the debate was really, is there any reason why we might not be able to at least discuss privatization versus unionization in government bureaucracy? And I think the conclusion of what happened. We didn't win the argument.
It's absolutely right, as you say, and nobody wants to talk about this part. The terrorist attacks on 9/11, the government was already in charge. We already had a CIA that cost us, $100 billion a year. We already had the NSA and the FBI and all of these organizations that failed, and now we know how many times they failed when it was so obvious what was happening right under their noses. Yet whenever the government fails, the people always suffer. But the current, and this has been building over the last couple of weeks, there have been many videos now. Even the Washington Post did a video, and people are using hashtags to describe how much they hate the wait. But it really has increased massively over the past few weeks. American Airlines alone have said that about 7,000 of their domestic passengers have missed flights. Of course, this costs a lot of money to the airlines, and it's horribly inconvenient to the passengers. But talking about budget, the TSA blames it on the fact that their budget was slashed and they don't have enough money. But I was looking before the show, they got $7.5 billion in 2015. They're getting $7.6 billion in 2017. So,
boy, that's a terrible slash. They're having trouble. So, now this is the problem is very clear to me, and those who think about a private property rights organization of a country versus government. But if we have fallacies in our foreign policy, too much occupation and too much bombing and too much droning, and it's a total failure, and none of the occupations and overthrowing of government works, what we do is just more of it and send more money. If an economy fails, which it is in the process of failing and had a deliberate downturn in 2008 and 2009, they don't change policy. They just pump more money into the people who caused the problem and accelerate it. So here it is once again. The government had failed, like you mentioned at the beginning, because the government was involved and did not put the burden of responsibility on the airlines. And it failed, so they create this monster. Now it's failing. I mean, the evidence is so clear. They're talking about how many people are missing flights and how terrible the travel situation is. So what do they want? Now the unions want 6,000 more employees. The government, the Republicans, and the Congress have already given them 800 more, and they're supposed to be added on here in a couple months. But that's not enough. They need 6,000 more. And for some reason, I'm not very optimistic that that's going to be a solution, because it's the atmosphere, it's the responsibility on who's in charge. And when government's in charge, nobody's in charge. They're in charge of their bureaucratic life. How do they protect their jobs, and how to blame somebody else when things go wrong. And that's what they're involved in. But it looks like the people are outraged over this. But the odds, from my opinion, of us actually changing, going in the right direction, saying, maybe the model's wrong. Maybe this model of saying that the government is responsible for the safety of everybody on an airplane, maybe that's wrong. But right now, as angry as the people are, I'm not sure we have the sentiment of the people, because immediately the opposition will use scare tactics and say, oh no, we did this and we did this, and if anything happens, it'll be our fault if we don't have more help. So I don't think that the American people are going to come our way, even though they should, and they should listen to the private option. But I'm afraid they're going to get all the money they want and all these, and it's going to. And the terrorists, or the people who like to scare us, love it. Here we worry about loss of our liberties. I mean, the foreign terrorists, the jihadists, they want to destroy our liberties. But who destroys our liberties? It's the TSA agents and everybody else that, and the invasion of our privacy, NSA, and all this stuff going on. We do it to ourselves, and we never say, what should the role of government be under these circumstances?
It's funny you mentioned those 6,000. This is this classic government math, the government numbers. The origin of this crisis was that the TSA anticipated that people would flock to their TSA pre-check program, where you would give the government a bunch of information about you and they would let you go in a shorter line. Well, surprise, surprise, people are sick of giving the government information about them voluntarily and especially involuntarily. So basically no one showed up for this. No one signed up for it. It was a product that the government introduced, and that product failed. But unlike in the free market, when a government product fails, they punish the consumer, which is what happened. So they laid off they got rid of 4,600 screeners because they thought this pre-check would be fantastic. Everyone hates it. So what do? They come back and say, well, we need 6,000 to make up for it. So that's then and the other. But, Zero Hedge pointed this out, and I've seen it elsewhere too. What we're actually seeing here, and I would bet this is the case, this is a TSA revolt over the reduction of the numbers of screeners. They are purposely slowing things down to punish the consumers and force them to call their congressman and get more money in there so they can have. This is a TSA union thing, and they're holding the American people hostage.
And the mentality of the politician and the people, they will use this recent crash in, the flight from Paris to Egypt. Say, look, see what happens. You got to have more, and they will use that, and the politicians are going to go along, and they'll probably get more money, not less. It'll probably go $8 billion or something like that. But technically, the whole thing has proven to be a failure. They get checked on. They have run a few tests, and this one test. The testers were taking weapons through security, and they did it on 70 occasions, and the government didn't come out too well. 67 times the weapons got through security. So we get punished, the consumer gets punished and mauled over, and missing flights, lose our liberties, and yet when they do a test, 67 out of 70, they can get a gun through security. If there's nothing more clear than that of the total failure of the bureaucratic approach, I don't know what can be done.
And this is only a recent one, the one you're referring to. This is called the red team exercise, where you'd have an organized group trying to get through on purpose to test. And this was in Minneapolis, if I'm not mistaken. But there are so many examples of this red team exercise showing the total failure of them. But you were talking a little bit before that they didn't fail with you in one of your recent flights.
No, the last time I was on a flight, just within the last month or so, I I had, for some reason, dreamed or thought that the rules had changed a little bit, and you were allowed to have a 1-inch knife blade on your fingernail clipper, you know. So I had it, and was very little. At one time, I had one a little bit longer, which was taken away on 9/12, the first time I flew after 9/11. And I kept it because I always thought, you know, I could do a tracheotomy with this knife, and it was probably maybe 2 inches long, but that didn't last. So I was misled. I thought I could have this. It was less than 1 inch. It was like that long. And so they discovered it was in my bag, and they went all through my stuff and poked and tore everything apart, and they finally found it and held it up like this. So the options to me were offered this. Well, because I didn't like what they were doing, they said, well, you can take this knife and take your stuff, go back out, go back to the counter, put it in the bag and check the bag through, and we'll let you keep your knife. I said, well, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And they said, well, then we'll have to dispose of it. And but for them to dispose of it, they said they have to have my permission. And I said, am I going to give you my permission to steal my knife? And I says, call your supervisor. The supervisor comes over, and he wasn't looking for trouble. He knew me, and we had talked before, you know, we tolerated each other. He came over, and he was in a box because the person that's picked out the knife, she was doing her job. She found this knife. They don't find guns, but they found my knife. And finally, I said, I'm not giving you permission to steal my knife. You can steal it. And he sort of, you know, nodded to the other person. So they finally were willing to steal my knife without my permission. But there's this technical thing. You have to comply and acquiesce to them. And we do that by just saying, yes, we're going to go through your security lines. And that's another. But I had another experience which shows something about these full body scanners. Chertoff, I remember him. He's the one that made a lot of money with the first ones, and they were found not to be effective. He made his money and ran, and still making a lot of money on national security. So I have artificial knees, so I don't go through the metallic thing, and I try to grin and bear it and go through the scanner, and it's still every bit as bad as ever. I mean, it is terrible. So one time I went through, and oh yeah, we see spots here, here, and here, and we have to do this, this, and this. And in the meantime, he said, oh, there's a little bit of fuzz here. You moved when you were under the scanner. You're going to have to go through again. I said, you're not serious. And so I looked at the scanner. I looked at the screen, and there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things on the screen. So I go out and come back in, and I wanted to see what would be on the screen. And there were da-da-da-da. There were a lot of marks. Not one alike. It was a completely different format. It is a farce. It's a fake. It's a fraud. And yet they spend all this time making us safe and secure. And then they wonder why people get upset. But the people aren't upset enough. And I don't know the answer because, on occasion I sort of have to get on an airplane. But maybe I'll be getting close to like Walter Williams is. He said, and Walter Williams is a great guy, and he used to give a lot of speeches. He says, I don't do any more. I will go only if you send me a private plane. I'm not going to get on a public airline and go through that. He had in his lifetime, he's had enough humiliation. He didn't want to do this. So it is a real tragedy, and it should be an incentive to wake up people. But so far, not so good.
Yeah, in the few times that I fly these days, I always opt out, and unfortunately that's even more humiliating to get patted down, but I feel like it's my last ability to protest the system, but there's never anyone in front of me or behind me that does the same. But I thought this might be a fun time to revisit a quote from, believe it or not, November 19th, 2001.
Wow,
yeah,
long time ago.
Yeah, this was the frenzy to pass the Patriot Act, and then the frenzy to do something about airport security. And here's a great quote. The pattern is always the same. Government agencies fail to do their job, yet those same failed agencies are given more money and personnel when things go wrong. That could have been written this week. You wrote it back in 2001. So,
well, somebody figures, well, how do you know? How do you know? Well, a little bit of common sense, once you understand government. They're not predictions as much as just intuition to know if you do this, this, and this, and know and understand government, I mean, if you don't look at government as a skeptic and be very skeptical of everything they say and do, I mean, you get what we have today in every area of our government. But and right now, today, most people are very skeptical about what's going on in the country, and that's why there's this rebellion, there's chaos in the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. But so far, I don't think their conclusions are anywhere close to what I've been talking about for these many years, because it isn't management style, it isn't who's ox getting gored and what we're going to do and where we're going to drop the bombs and how we're going to pretend we're protecting civilization. We're not even there. We're still talking about the same thing of managing government, and I think in a free society we're supposed to manage ourselves.
Well, here's what people will say that are watching this show. Some of them, at least, will say, okay, Ron, it's great. You're criticizing them. We're all angry. But what would you do if you were in charge?
Well, I would do there what I would do with the Federal Reserve. I'd get rid of the government agency that's causing all the harm and make private individuals deal with it. And that means that we don't need a TSA. We need to get rid of it. And the most important thing we can do is to put the responsibility on the owner, because the owners don't like the responsibility because they don't want the liability. So the responsibility of safety has to be the private owner. There's nothing in the Constitution nor a directive in a free society that makes government responsible for making us safe and secure. That's not part of the role of government. They can deal with violence and they can deal with outside threats of war and things like that. But they can't possibly make us safe and secure, because that leads to the welfare state and the warfare state and the violation of our civil liberties. So, but the principle has to be the responsibility is on the individual. We had a fair amount of it before 9/11, and some of the examples that I used back then was I think of where we're sitting right now. We can look out the window and practically see Dow Chemical. I mean, they don't depend on the government. They don't depend on the federal government, the FBI, the CIA, or anybody else. They don't even depend on the local police. They have their security forces. Now, if they have a problem and they have to arrest or hold somebody, yes, they'll call on the law enforcement. But it doesn't happen. They have fences, they have security a long time before 9/11 because they have property to deal with. And just think about, I always thought, we think more of our money than we do of the people, because the people are protected by the government ineffectively. They can't do it right, but the money's protected. The money's hauled around in armored cars, and it's pretty darn rare you ever hear anybody losing any money from an armored car. So it's been privatized. So the responsibility has to be on the owners of the equipment. Bus lines, trains. Of course, right now the trains are all owned by the government. And there's crashes all the time. So, but that principle isn't there. People, and I think the whole issue that we're dealing with is the issue of safety and who's responsible for it. And I think that it's absolutely a personal responsibility. From day one, we're born, it's our parents' responsibility to make us safe and secure. And we want to make our home safe and secure. And it isn't the government. I compare the situation, if you depend on government to make us safe and secure, that it would be like if you were raising a chicken farm. Well, a few people around here have some chickens and all, and we have to deal with raccoons. So you have to make your chickens safe. You put them in a very, very tight steel cage and put spikes in the ground, and you protect those chickens, and the chickens are safe. And that's what government would have to do to make us safe. How are they going to make us safe in our homes? On every little safety factor, they try all these safety features and all. And just think of the violence occurs in homes and everything else. But you can't have a policeman there. It's insane. And yet, not once is it mentioned in the Constitution that one of the responsibility of government is to make us safe. And along with that is secure. If it's safe and secure, with in economics, it invites, a massive bankrupt government.
Yeah. People can't get over the idea that no business wants to kill its customers.
That's for sure. Personal responsibility and liability is a good way to solve so many of our problems. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but I'll tell you what, government can perfectly mess things up, and they do it. You have a bureaucracy, and they will mess it up. If you want lines, ask the government to take care of things. There are lines at the airport, and they're atrocious, but you have lines at the post office, don't we? And we say, oh, well, that's the post office. But do we have a line at the FedEx office? No, the FedEx comes to our building, practically fills out our forms for us and tells us where our packages are. And they respond to us because they have a little competition and they're trying to satisfy their customer. But no, once it's the government, you'll be in lines. And that's where the problem is, that we have to assume responsibility. Freedom doesn't work unless we have the sense of self-reliance and self-responsibility to take care of our needs and take care of our family and provide the safety that we all desire. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.